there, and welcome back to another episode of Verses and Visions, where we celebrate creativity, community, and the stories that move us. Today, I've got something really exciting to share with you. If you've been inspired by any of our episodes, and let's be honest, how could you not? Then this is your chance to make your voice heard and make an impact. I'm thrilled to announce the Verses and Visions Most Inspiring Episode contest. Here's how it works. Think back to an episode that left you speechless, moved you to tears, or sparked a new idea. Then head over to www.sageversepublishing.com to nominate that episode. Again, that's sageversepublishing.com. It's quick, easy, and a chance to celebrate the voices that have made a difference in your life. And here's the best part. Your nominations will help us recognize the most inspiring guest who will receive $500 donated to a charity of their choice. This is more than just celebrating their episode. It's about amplifying their impact in the world. Now, nominations are open December 13th through the 31st. Visit www.sageversepublishing to share your favorite episode. And hey, if there's an episode that really connects with you, feel free to share this contact with your friends, family, or anyone else who loves a good story. Thank you for being a part of the Verses and Visions community. Your support, your stories, and your enthusiasm mean the world to me. Let's celebrate together and create some meaningful change along the way. Now for another inspiring episode of Verses and Visions. Welcome to the podcast Verses and Visions Creative Conversations. I'm your host, Cassidy Beck, and I am thrilled to be welcoming September Fawkes. September Fawkes works as a freelance editor, writing instructor, and writing tip blogger. She has edited for both award-winning and best-selling authors as well as beginning writers. She is best known for her blog, September Fawkes, which won the Writer's Digest 101 Best Websites for Writers Award. Her approaches have been praised by K.M. Welland, Angela Ackerman, and David Farland. September is also a monthly guest on the Apex Writers Group and a writing coach on Writers Helping Writers. Some may say she needs to get a social life. It'd be easier if her fictional one wasn't so interesting. Welcome, September.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I also feel like I totally can relate to you when you were saying that you might need to get a social, like more of a social life. If the characters weren't so compelling, I had that problem as well. And it's funny because there will be some time where I'm like in a group and I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this situation, and realizing it's like a book that I read and that they'll have no clue what I'm talking about. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, I think so. And that is like one of the interesting things about books. I was talking about this with family. Reading a novel is so personal because it's just you and the book. Unless you're doing an audio book with a group. If you want to talk about it, one, they have to have read the book, or you have to explain it, or you're explaining it, or you don't share it. So it's more of a one-on-one type of storytelling. Whereas if you're at a movie, which I also love, that is more public. More people are likely to have seen the movie. If you look, you have to see, okay, have they read the book? Do they know what I'm talking about?
So it said that you work with David Farland. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I worked for him as his personal assistant to begin with, or I guess ongoing. And he would just have me do anything he needed to get ready for like his conferences or like help with his website stuff. He also has a writing tip blog that I was helping with and like sending out newsletters. And then he would also teach online classes. I guess they were online yet when I started with him, but travel and teach classes. And so sometimes I'd help him get ready for that. And he started having me he does freelance editing as well as being a writing instructor. And so I would sometimes go through his students or clients' stuff first, and then he would go through it. So that's how I started getting more like professional editing experience. I did have some editing experience in college, but this time I was getting paid for it type of thing. So that's mainly what I did, and just really any kinds of odds and ends that he needed help with. Then he started putting more of his classes like online. So sometimes I would find photos for that, and that could go with the videos. So just lots of odds and ends, but lots of reading of people's stories and giving them feedback as well, which I liked.
That's incredible. And what a great opportunity and mentor for you. I also know he mentored Brandon Sanderson, Brandon Mole,
Stephanie Meyer, James Dashner, Dan Wells, Jessica Day George. That was a cool experience, but it's funny because he just worked at his house. So I would just go to his house to work. And at first I just worked at his kitchen table. And then eventually I was like, can I have an office space? So then he put me in the study. So that was a little nicer because I wasn't in the middle of everything, a little easier to concentrate. Such part of the experience. I knew his son. We're the same age, went to the same schools. I didn't even know his dad was an author or anything at first. And so I did have like a connection to his family that way. And his wife a little bit. I served with her in the church. And after I graduated from college, I was looking for work. And his wife said, oh, you should come do work for Dave. By that time, I realized he was like this amazing author. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so she's, I'll have him call you or something. And he never did. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then I actually had his email in my address book in my email because I had interviewed him for a thing in college. And like my email got hacked and it sent out a bunch of like spammy emails out. And I sent one to him. And he saw my name, so he replied, hey, my wife was saying maybe you wanted to do some work for me. How about you call me sometime? I was like, what? This must be made to be. I will never say spammy emails are good, except in that one situation. But I was like, no, don't click on that link. I don't know what happened here. But it was a funny way to like get like more connected with him. And like originally he was just going to have me work for a few weeks and it was a trade-off. I was going to work for him for 2 weeks and take one of his writing workshops. And then he liked me enough that I just stuck around. So there's a longer backstory to how I got involved with that. So yeah, it turned out great for me. It's the type of stuff I want to do. So it's a good experience.
That's awesome. And I love that it was like the hackers that kind of got you the job because that I'm sure that was not their intent, but that is awesome.
It's a weird story. So that's why I was like, it must be meant to be for me.
He just needed that little nudge. What an incredible opportunity. You love the writer's journey and helping writers figure out storytelling and crafting. Is this something that has always been a part? Have you always loved writing? Or, sorry, have you always loved reading? Is this something that from a young age?
Since I was like 7, I wrote my first little story. I still have it because my mom was kept in a binder for me. And it was like about chickens that were going to go look for water or whatever. And since then, like I was interested in writing and I edited it with big black streaks through the writing. And so that was something I always pursue. So I tried to take what creative writing classes I had available at the time, which like people today are so lucky because we do have things like this and we have so much stuff on the internet now. And like when I wanted to learn about like working in the writing industry, I like when I was younger, as I got a little bit older, like I obviously came in contact with Dave. But like when I was younger, I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't even know where to start. Now at school, we have so many tools online. Was into writing all growing up. Like me and my friends would write stories and exchange them and everything. And then in college, like I was like, am I sure this is what I want to pursue? I was like, yeah, for me, it's one of those things where it's, if I were to die, would I be more sad that I tried this and failed or that I didn't try this and always wondered, you know what I mean? And so I did go on and I got my English degree as a fiction editor, then the managing editor of the literary journal. Do you still write? I've gone more into editing and like writing instruction and mentioned briefly in our email. I am working on something, but it's a work in progress. And so I don't have a ton to share specifically about that project, but I hope eventually to be able to finish it and get it published as well. But I really like helping other authors and giving feedback on stories since I was a teenager and we'd review each other's stuff. In college, I took creative writing classes and we'd workshop. I've always been super into stories. If you look at my journals from when I was a teenager, a lot of it was me writing about writing or my favorite stories and what I thought about them. So that's turned into my blog. My blog is written for anyone who wants to read it. But I like doing this stuff a lot. I really like dissecting stories and like trying to figure out how they work. And when I was working for Dave, he had me like start giving feedback on his students' assignments and stuff. He's, you're pretty good at seeing these things and like how to improve stuff. And one of the clients that I did some work on was also another freelance editor. And he saw my work and he was like, hey, you're pretty good at like giving feedback. He wanted to talk with me more about freelancing. And so his name was Joshua Esso. I don't know if anyone's listening has heard of him. And so he got me more in contact with like freelance editing. But it's funny because out of everything, I'm best known for my blog, which is like what you talked about is I'm basically dissecting how stories work and why they work the way they do and why we have writing rules. After high school, getting more into the writing community and conferences and stuff, I was like, I'm a skeptic a little bit. Like when people tell a writing rule, I'm always like, why? What about this story? This story breaks that rule. And this is my favorite story. Just asking why a lot and trying to figure out why that worked in certain situations and not other situations, and like digging into that, and I blog about that, and I feel like it helps refine my understanding of stories. If I just took what everybody said at face value, like what I had been working on, I probably would have come together better for me, like this project that I would have been working on. But doing things the hard way have actually paid off for me in a strange sense, because like I feel like it's helped me dig deeper and understand how stories work better. As an editor, that's really helpful because I can look at a story and then tell them what's wrong, what's working, what's not working, and like it also explain why, as opposed to just being like, this is just the rule. Or I'll be like, if you want to break the rule, here's some ways you can do it. So, not a long answer, but I'm just like, I've always been really passionate about stories and like digging into them and figuring out how they work and when we can do different things with them, why that works for some people and not other people, or some stories, not other stories. I don't know. I've been running my blog for, I don't know, I think probably like 12 years. And that's pretty much what my blog has been about, what I've posted, digging deeper all that time.
That's awesome. I know I've taken a class from you, and one of the things you did really well, if if I'm remembering the class correctly, you looked at kind of movies and dissected movies in a way that you're like, this is what the story structure from this movie, like this is why it works. And I think that's really nice because, like, it goes to your point. It's hard to say this is where, if this is where this book falls apart, because you don't want to throw another author, you don't want to throw an author under the bus, but also if someone hasn't read that book, then that's going to mean nothing to them. I think you were using well-known stories and talking about like the character development in them, and it's like a shared experience, and I thought that was wonderful. Does that sound familiar?
I tend to use more movie references with writing. There's content, which is what the story is, and lines, which is how it's communicated to the audience. I tend to like to teach more about the content just because I think that's more fun and more interesting. And so for content, I pick a lot of film examples because more people have seen them. These storytelling principles can be applied to any kind of fictional storytelling, maybe even certain types of memoirs as well. So whether that's going to be a movie or to some extent maybe video games, I don't know, comic books or a novel, a lot of them are going to have, or TV show, are going to have like pretty much the same types of principles, but where they're different is the way they're being communicated to the audience, and those will have different strengths and weaknesses, obviously. I've done that in a lot of classes, so I don't know which one, but I do tend to pick film and dissect it because people are more familiar with it. Film, when it comes to actually looking at story structure, they have to be a lot tighter because there's a lot more money riding on these films, and so they need to make that money back, and so things tend to be more dialed in, and so it might be more obvious in like some of the blockbuster films, so to speak, whereas in novels we actually have little bit more wiggle room. We could say we can get away with a little bit more things, so it's also like those things tend to be like a little more obvious to pick out in movies.
So I enjoy talking about imposter syndrome. Is that something you've experienced?
Yeah, I think a lot of us do.
Tell me about your experience with it.
I was trying to think of a specific example, and I don't know that I have one, but I'm speaking from my own experience. So if this doesn't resonate with people, like that's totally cool. Or you have a totally different opinion than me, that's totally fine. I have zero problem with that. But I think like one of the ways I think about imposter syndrome that has been helpful to me is sometimes I feel like we get scared of imposter syndrome, or being like, I really don't want to feel like an imposter, and like focusing on that and trying to make it go away, which I think that's great. Of course we want to make it go away, but I wouldn't let it like stop you. Sometimes I feel like it's more like a relationship that you have where it's, I don't know if it ever goes away completely. There's definitely times like as I get more experienced, I feel less like an imposter. But sometimes I still feel that way. Like I'll see things that other freelance editors are doing and being like, do I need to do it that exact way? Am I doing this the right way? Do I need to do this and this? Or if I'm teaching somewhere, like at a writing conference, maybe watching other people be like, maybe I should have done it this way, or my presentation's like this and theirs is like that. Was my the right thing? I think the key is not letting that stop you, because it might, like, be a recurring thing to some extent, and I feel like it's one of those things you sometimes have to learn to live with. I believe you can overcome it for a time, but we're always gonna be learning and growing in new ways, and so we're probably gonna be dealing with it again in the future. I did think of one moment. I was at a writing conference a year or 2 ago. I was on a panel about stakes. My views on stakes are atypical,
Will you
but
define
I still
stakes?
over stakes are what the character has to lose, what's at risk. On Harry Potter was the wizarding world, so to speak. And so when I was learning, that sounded like I understood it, but I didn't really understand it to the depth that I wanted to, because I like to go really deep. And like I thought that was vague and it wasn't that helpful to me. And so I realized stakes are the potential consequences in the story. For example, if Voldemort gets the Sorcerer's Stone, he'll take over the wizarding world. And so that has the stakes in it, but I can see a clear sense of consequence. So it's not just this is at risk. It's okay, in the story, we're trying to pursue this thing, and there's negative and positive consequences linked to whether or not the character succeeds. So that's how I like to look at it. Most people focus on what's at risk, which is great if that works for you. For me, that wasn't enough. I was on this panel and it was all about stakes, and like my point of view and my thoughts were different than the other writers on there. Some are more experienced and have more accolades than me. I still believe in my approach, but I felt a little out of sync. Imposter might be strong, but just thinking differently, feeling like the odd one out. You just go with it. Sometimes I wish I stayed and sounded more confident, but what's more important is showing up and pursuing what you want to pursue, and just not letting those negative thoughts and feelings stop you. Even in the writing world, like a thing that would come up a lot, especially when I was younger and wanted to said that I wanted to work in the writing industry, like a lot of people will be like, "Oh, but it's so lonely. Like you spend so much time alone." And like I realized there's a lot of people that are really scared of loneliness. And to me, it's easier because I like being alone. I like being with people too. But if I come home to an empty house, I can do whatever. I like having people around as well. But I might be an outlier in that sense. But I'm like, yeah, you do get lonely, but that's part of something you just manage and you just learn to deal with. It's not a deal breaker. I wouldn't let it stop me from doing what I really want to do, being more around working with people than I do about writing or editing. So maybe you wouldn't pick that path. But I care a lot about writing and editing. So those days I might get lonely, it's just something you learn to deal with, as opposed to like something to be really scared of, trying to escape or trying hard not to feel. I feel like it's more like we should try to manage those feelings and like those situations and not be like so scared of them to the point that we stop doing whatever we want to do. Because I think of like imposter syndrome. If you get really focused on that, I would think you might not do anything because you're probably going to feel like an imposter, and especially if it's something new. You probably haven't grown a lot of confidence at it yet because you don't have a lot of experience yet. And so if you just focus on like how you feel like an imposter and don't move forward, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're not learning and growing. My attitude's been more like, yeah, if you have those negative feelings or thoughts or things that you struggle with, rather than like fixating on that, just show up and move forward, even if you feel that way. It's okay to feel that way. I could be sitting on a panel and feel like an imposter, but I still move forward and I try to stay true to what I'm there to say. It doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes I say things and I'm like, okay, that came out weird, but that's okay. We're all human and learning. I've heard even famous people have imposter syndrome. So it's okay if that person has imposter syndrome. Maybe it's something we can all try to learn to deal with. That's my perspective.
So I think I hear you saying that whether it's imposter syndrome or loneliness, don't let that obstacle or fear stop you from pursuing your passions or something you want to do. Come to peace with that feeling and move forward.
Yep, that's a good summation. Yeah.
I think it's interesting you enjoy being alone. It brought up for me, like when I was in college, I lived with 6 girls and I shared a room with one. I remember, I feel like this happened a lot. But when after classes, coming home, like walking on campus and just thinking like, oh, please let everyone be gone. I just want to be alone for a little minute. I enjoy just having quiet time to myself. One of my greatest things that my husband ever did, I think it was for a birthday. I had this deadline that I was trying to reach, and he rented a hotel room for me just by myself. And it was like the greatest thing ever. And I think for a lot of people, that would be like, that's really weird. And it might be. For me, it was a very happy moment.
Yeah. No, it is funny how people are so different. Because I had this friend in college, and he was like, "You know what the worst feeling in the world is? Being in a room and knowing you're totally alone and nobody's with you." I'm like, "I don't know if we're gonna be friends anymore." Just kidding. I didn't say that, but I was like, "I can't relate, but I'm sorry that you feel that way sometimes." I'm like, "Okay, go be social, you extrovert." But
It's funny because I'm sure some people in that like college camp, like in the college campus thing, where they're like walking home, they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to get energized and meet up with my peeps." That is not the way it is for me.
yeah, I'm definitely an introvert. I need to recharge alone, and I tend to need a lot of space. And I even have a hard time doing creative things in a group because I just feel like I need to get into this alone meditative state. But other people are more successful when they're creative with a group. Figuring out what works best for you is helpful. I know people who sit together and write, and that's awesome. If that's what you like to do. I did that as a teenager with some friends. But now it's hard for me to get in the zone that way. Like, I'm like, no, you guys need to isolate me. I need to be in a high tower with the door locked. Nobody knock on my door. I don't really say that, but I don't know. It just gets me in the zone more, which I guess does remind me of Brandon Sanderson because I've heard him talk and it takes me like 20 minutes to get in the writing zone. And if anyone interrupts, it takes another 20 minutes to get back in. Of course, I have my slow days where I'm like, would someone please knock on my door and distract me? I'm having a hard time working, editing, or writing.
I get that. I guess my question was, I've met you at different conferences, and I think that's a part of your job, presenting and connecting with people. Is that a skill set that you've had to develop more, or is that because that sounds like it's out of your comfort zone? But you also said you enjoy people. Can you speak to that?
That's interesting because I actually do presenting and talking to groups. I like sharing what I've learned. I do get nervous. I like it, but I feel very drained afterwards. I usually want to be alone to recharge. If I have other people with me at the conference, then sometimes I'll tell them, I'm like, I need to just sit somewhere by myself for like an hour after a presentation. Not always, but some I'll feel more drained after. But I like sharing what I know with other people. But I will say there are other things. Growing up, I didn't like performing in front of people. I took dance and stuff. But I don't know, I just felt like pressure with everybody there, like watching me. But when I'm like teaching or giving a talk, I'm focused on delivering what I prepared. I usually feel confident about the content that I'm bringing forward, unless I am having imposter syndrome. And so I do enjoy it, but a lot of times I'll be pretty drained afterwards. So I'll be like, okay, I need to be alone. Like, not like completely introverted. Like, I wouldn't say it's like way out of my comfort zone. There's definitely been times in my life where like it was harder for me. Like I went through a phase in college where it was really hard for me. But I realized it wasn't so much I don't know, this might sound weird, but I realized it wasn't the public speaking that I had a problem with. It's that one of the things I like about writing and like editing is if you mess up or something, you can just go back and fix it. You have a lot of control before you show the finished product, right? But when you're talking in front of people, if you mess up, that's it. You can't go back and fix it. You have to continue with your talk. It was me realizing I had an issue with letting go of control. I wanted everything to be amazing. I'm a perfectionist. When you're doing public speaking and events, you have to let go of control. There can be things totally outside your control. There could be electrical problems and you don't have your PowerPoint, which is something that could happen. Your mic doesn't work. Or maybe your mind suddenly goes blank. And so, me recognizing that it was like, I really have more of a fear of not being in control in those settings, learning to roll with that helped me get through phases where public speaking was harder. I'm a perfectionist. I want to do a really good job. I want to do my best job. And to let go of that and be like, sometimes, especially with public speaking, that isn't going to happen. And that has to be okay. You have to move forward. So that was something that I did struggle with for a time in college, but worked through it.
I enjoy writing. And one of the things with writing is you go through several editing and you can like think about a word for a really long time before you put it on the paper. And you think, okay, is this the best word? You can do that 100 times before you like present it. And I think that's the difficult thing that I have with speaking. I want that opportunity, but you can't be like, and so there are some things that I'm like, oh, I know that's not the right word, but that's just the word that I have right now. Also, a thing that I feel like is difficult for me as well. And maybe that is a part of that letting go of control. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to communicate an idea. It might not be the best word or best presentation, like if your mic breaks down. But I think just showing up, trying, and next time learning this didn't work. Maybe this is what I'll do next time.
Yeah, and you say lots of prayers to get through it.
For sure.
That was definitely like a hang up for me when I would do public speaking type things in college. Just like, I don't even know if I would say it was like a fear of messing up, but I guess it was. But it was more like not feeling like I can control the situation, which sounds terrible because it makes me sound like a control freak. Maybe I am to some extent. Maybe I am when it comes to producing a product of some sort.
But I feel like that expectation, I was reading your blog and it was interesting because you were saying like you're an editor and that you want to put information out, but that you're like, there might be a typo. Even the best authors have released works that have typos in them. And it's funny. I saw something that made me laugh about that was saying you have to credit those typos because of how many people that had gone through that is a really tenacious typo, which I find humorous.
Especially with blogging, I don't make money directly from my blog. I do like indirectly because that's where a lot of my clients come from. I'm doing a ton of stuff. I teach an online writing class, I'm editing, I'm trying to work on my own stuff. And so I love to blog, but I'm going to prioritize those other things before. So I do try to like catch typos and everything and do Grammarly, but still sometimes you'll never catch your own typos. And I'm a one-man band because I like to be alone. I usually don't have people reading through my blog posts, but I'll try to run it through Grammarly or some other things and catch what I can, but not like stress about it too much because especially for like my blog, I care more about like the idea, like the content, what I'm trying to teach and convey people than the way it's said. If I was working on something else, that's usually more important, but I would care more about getting that exact word to hit it exactly. But I feel like a blog's a lot of times more casual anyway. But yeah, it is. One of the reasons I kind of mentioned that too, because there are people who get really fixated on typos. And the thing is, you're not going to catch your own typos. You're not going to catch them all. You might catch. I went back and looked at a blog post from years ago, and I was like, there's like a typo right there that like I felt should have been obvious and nobody commented. But some people get really fixated on typos. If that's what you want to do, cool. You should go into copy editing and proofreading. I don't do that type of editing, but sometimes I feel like we get so fixated on them that we're completely like missing the whole point of what's being said, you know? Like it'd be like as I'm talking right now, I say a few times and like I just said it, fixated on that as opposed to actually listening to what's being said, like the content of our conversation. But now that I said that, you guys are all going to be really listening to how many times I say while I'm talking.
So you are a woman after my own heart. And I feel like this is why I like to do the podcast because I edit the podcast. And so I had no idea how many times I say but as far as the finished product, there is a software that it makes it very easy to take those out. I am a big picture kind of girl. And so I guess my question that I would ask for you. So I was given advice when I wrote my first book, I was like, I can tweak and define and like work on this until the end of time and it will never be perfect. And
Mhm.
advice that I was given that my brother gave me, which I thought was good. If you don't look back at your first product, like years down the road, and you're a little bit embarrassed by it, then you waited too long. If you're waiting for that perfect product, it's never going to happen. What would you, but you want to put quality out because you want a reader to be a rereader and come back for your stuff and not be turned off like this is a pile of garbage. Talk to me about that. What are your thoughts?
Finding that boundary, it's hard to find that line. I'll be speaking from my experience. Sometimes for me, that's where prayer comes in. Because I've taught a lot of Sunday school and church lessons. I pray about it and I'm trying to listen. I feel like I can tell when it's ready. It's possible to over prepare. And I know when we over prepare, sometimes that, to me, my experience is either does one or two things. It brings in fear again, because I don't know, I'm trying hard and I get really scared that I've messed something up. The other thing that it sometimes does for me is I've gone over something so much that I'm not really present when I'm giving the lesson or the presentation because, like, I've already gone over it so many times that I'm just an autopilot, which I don't necessarily think is good either. Yeah, there's problems with, like, over preparing. At the same time, though, it depends what level you're at. Because if you are more of a beginner, you have more work to do to put something out there. I guess it depends what your goals are. But if I'm just thinking, if I'm working with the writer, if you're a writer who's like a brand new beginner and your goal is to get traditionally published, you're gonna be putting lots and lots of work fixing stuff while you're learning. There's so much you don't know. As you get more experienced, there's less of that. There's always more to learn, but you become more discerning on what's most important and what you can put where. And so it is, I don't know, it's a hard situation. I feel like it's a personal thing to figure out what's right for you in your situation. The deadline decides if it's done or the deadline's here. I got to send this off. I tend to be a deep diver, more detailed. I hesitate to say detailed because I don't know if that's always like, when I say detailed, I think of like surface stuff. And I don't know that I'm always talking about surface stuff, but to be more thorough than a lot of people, it's just the way that I am. And so I'll probably spend more time on things than a lot of people would on their own projects because they're ready to move on. I think that's fine too. So you have to figure out where you are, what works best for you. Like maybe if you were working on the same thing for a long time, you get bored. So you're like, okay, let's be done with this. I'm the type of person who would spend hundreds of hours like on a project or something because I want to get it as good as I can. At some point, I get that feeling when it's there and I'm like, okay, this is done. Maybe I'll come back and fix a few things, but it's time to move on. Just trying to tune in, and it's almost like an intuitive thing for me. Some people in my life say I'm not a great person to ask because I'll spend longer on projects than most. For me, I feel like it works. And then I feel really like proud or confident of what I have completed. Like I know it's something good or my best. If I just try to get something done or have it good enough, it's like this nagging voice in my head, like, "I know this could be so much better, I know this could be great." Whereas, like, you brought up, like, okay, looking at old blog posts or whatever, like, there's definitely some things that I'm like, "Wow, like, my views have really evolved, I understand that subject so much better now." At that time, that was my best. As far as I could see, that was the best I could do. I don't feel any, "Oh, I wish I had done this and this," which maybe other people would feel that way, but I'm like, "Yeah, that was my best," or that's the way I looked at it at the time, and that was the best way I could communicate it. Now I've evolved, built on that, and I have something more. Quality versus quantity, it's a difficult argument. I tend to be like more quality person to some extent, but then people are like, you have to create lots of quantity to have great quality, which I agree with. Sometimes that's misleading because I feel like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. It depends how you look at it, because you could say quantity is producing a bunch of different like things that you're like, done, here's all these things, and that can lead to quality. Focusing on maybe you're doing different things to prepare for this one really good quality type thing. If that kind of makes sense. I don't know. I guess this is a view of, are we just trying to get as much done, or are we doing this all as practice to like this finished product, and that's the quality that we're sending out. No, I guess you could look at, what does it mean? Is this something you're doing like personally and then you're gonna finish something you're gonna share with other people? Or are you just sharing them all, like all of them that you've done with everybody, which is fine too. I don't know. There's arguments for both. The danger of just doing, okay, here's the thing is maybe you're not taking enough time to learn and fix what was going wrong. Then you're repeating the same mistakes from each project to project because you didn't like slow down and look at how you could redo that or reword that or reframe that to make it better. So definitely a balancing act. Hopefully that's helpful figuring out what works best for you, what kind of person you are, what you want to produce, what your goals are. And just like for me, it's just an intuitive feeling.
I think the couple things I want to bring up again, you talked about, I totally resonated. You mentioned that if it's a church talk or something, that you don't want to have rehearsed so much that you sound robotic. I've been there and understand what you're talking about. You also mentioned you had a sense of when it was enough and when you needed to move on. What does that feel like for you?
It feels like a sense of completeness. This is what it needs to be to fulfill its purpose, and everything else will be okay. The rest, if I can say it, the rest is in God's hands, so to speak, instead of just in my hands. I guess that's how I would explain it, is just like this feeling of this is enough, this is complete, and the rest, there's coming to terms with that not everything's going to be in my control. So then coming to terms with there might always be things out of my control, but this is what it needs to be, and I'm going to show up and do it. That's how I would explain it.
September, where can we find your stuff?
On my blog, septemberfawkes.com, which is a writing tip blog. I do editing services. I do developmental online editing, mostly developmental these days, which you can find at foxediting.com. If you go to my regular website, there will be a link there as well. I'm on most social media outlets like Facebook, X, Instagram. I'm on Tumblr, so that's where you can find me.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
All right, thanks for having me.